you know, there's a lot going on. Like, I don't know if you guys know this, but there's literally a floating island of garbage in the middle of the ocean right now. Yeah. I think it's called Puerto Rico.
Currently, it seems like half of Americans look at Puerto Rico through a pretty negative lens, discarding it or using it as a butt of a joke. I mean, that clip we all just watched, that actually happened, that was at a presidential campaign that millions of people watched. But that's why today, I'm going to be talking about why American citizens, all of us, should grow in appreciation for the beautiful territory that is Puerto Rico. Okay? So let's talk Puerto Rico for real this time. I'm going to briefly go over the history of Puerto Rico and why it's a territory. About 500-600 years ago, it was colonized by the Spaniards in the 1500s, right? For 400 years, it was a Spanish colony, kind of like Mexico. Mexico gained its independence 70 years, though, before Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico was never part of Mexico. Big misconception there. During the Spanish-American War, the U.S. invaded Puerto Rico, and since they ended up winning that war, they forced Puerto Rico to become a U.S. territory. They were not asked or consulted. In 1892, Puerto Rico became part of the U.S. because of the U.S. Okay, now it's time to look at some of the counter-arguments or some of the perspectives to why many Americans dislike Puerto Rico. At the end of the day, it boils down to two main reasons, okay? Reason number one, Americans say, look, Puerto Rico is at 120 years to either become its own country, gain independence, right? Get out of America, or become an actual state, right? And become one of us. Why hasn't it done either of those? Okay, we'll get into that. It's very flawed in many reasons. But before we do that, let's introduce the second perspective, and I'll let Donald Trump have the honors of introducing it for us.
Mick Mulvaney is here, right there, and Mick is in charge of a thing called budget. Now, I hate to tell you, Puerto Rico, but you've thrown our budget a little out of whack because we've spent a lot of money on Puerto Rico, and that's fine.
Yeah, it's because Americans are concerned about how much money is being sent to aid a territory that has suffered from natural disaster after natural disaster, that has struggling communities. And no, the richest country in the world can't shell out some money or has to complain every time they do it. Yeah, let's not like that. Since when is the United States greedy like this? What? We're sending millions of dollars all over. We can't send some money to a territory of the United States, to you as citizens? Fine. You know what? That's their perspective. Let's let it rest. And now let's go into why those are flawed. Okay, addressing argument number one, right? Why hasn't Puerto Rico either gained independence or become a state like the rest of us? Huh? Why? Well, to become a state, Congress has to vote to let them become a state. And guess what? There have been 4 separate elections held in Puerto Rico where the majority of Puerto Ricans want to become a state. Because why would they not want to become a state of the richest country in the world, right? They want to. But guess what? Even though they are U.S. citizens, they only have 1 member of Congress representing them, and he can't even vote. He can't even vote. So they basically have no representation. But why do the Congress people in America not want to let them become a state? Why are they keeping them as a territory? Why? Well, on the Republican side, all the congressmen are worried that adding Puerto Rico as part of a state would then give Puerto Ricans the ability to vote. Yes, even though they're U.S. citizens, they're actually not allowed to vote, that's crazy. That's a video for a different time. But giving them statehood would allow them to vote, and they're worried that since a majority of Latinos tend to vote democratically, that it would shake up their elections and shake this up and maybe it has something to do with them publicly calling them trash at their campaigns, that too. But they're worried that they're going to lose a lot of votes. So it's not in their best interest to let Puerto Rico become a state, okay? But why aren't the Democrats then pushing for Puerto Rico to become a state? Well, honestly, there's no real reason. I mean, for the most part, they have been pushing to let Puerto Rico become a state, and they just haven't been able to But as an outsider looking in, it seems like they're not trying hard enough, right? You have 3 million people wanting to become a state of America, and they're not represented in Congress, and the people who are in Congress are not doing a good job hearing the voices of millions of people. The second counter argument is a little bit harder to break down because it really sums down to just don't be greedy, like support people who are in need. That should be fundamental logic, right? But, for those Americans who are hard to convince using sound logic, let's look at some actual facts, okay, to why Puerto Rico deserves to receive funding from the United States. Well, the biggest one out there is they actually do pay taxes, and on average, they actually pay more taxes. So yeah, they deserve to have taxpayers' money help them. That's how that works. That's why we pay taxes. That's why they pay taxes. To benefit from them when they need us, right? It is not their fault that they're being struck with multiple hurricanes. That is not their fault. And actually, if we want to look at and argue that we should be supporting these communities that are struggling and stuff like that because it's their fault, they're in the economic shambles, whatever. Actually, it's our fault that their economy is struggling. Because when Puerto Rico became a U.S. territory 100 years ago, right, the U.S. immediately devalued their currency. For years, their currency that they were using originally was devalued because it was mixed with the same economy with, the US dollar, which is one of the most powerful currencies in the whole world, right? And if it gets mixed in the same economy because they're like kind of part of the country, right? It's obviously going to devalue. The US saw that, they let it devalue, then they forced Puerto Rico to switch to the US dollar after it already lost half of its value. So then in turn, they kind of lost half their money. They converted to half the amount of dollars they should have been able to in the first place. They were set back millions of dollars from the start, okay? And now we ask, why is their economy struggling? It was our fault. Okay, I kind of touched on this one earlier, but another reason Puerto Ricans of all people deserve U.S. funding and U.S. money and not to have to be complained about every time we're giving them that is because they actually serve in the military at a higher rate than, again, homeland citizens. They serve at a higher rate per capita. They've had more people serve, more people die, unfortunately, while serving. And yeah, have been much more engaged in the military sense, which a lot of you guys, respect and appreciate. And so therefore you should respect and appreciate Puerto Ricans because they're out there serving at a higher rate. And look, I'll end it off by saying this. It feels very black and white when talking about part of the U.S. Puerto Rico is part of the U.S. And look, we can go back and forth on all these counter arguments and these main points and this and that and the pros and cons of everything. But at the end of the day, there's American citizens living in Puerto Rico and they're thriving. They have a beautiful, beautiful state, country, territory, whatever you want to call it, right? And we should be in support of that. We should not be calling a beautiful land like this that we're blessed to even be associated with garbage. Ever. We should be supporting them, right? Because if they succeed, the U.S. succeeds, right? And if, one day they decide to gain independence, good for them, right? They deserve it. And if they want statehood, which they currently are voting for, who are we to say no when we forced them to be part of the U.S. 100 years ago? And then we forced them to serve in the military. And then we forced them to pay taxes without representation. And to end it all, I'll let Seth Meyers, who says it best, right, and puts it simplest, conclude this talk.
You wanted to make America great again, so I'll say it again. Puerto Rico is America. They're included in the whole Make America Great Again thing.